It is finally time, guys. So we are going to do the single turbo install on the Z4 with the N54. The kit is here. However, the manifold's not here because I went to go drop that off to get ceramic painted. So we're gonna wait on that, but there are several things we can do in preparation for the manifold. So that's okay. But this whole single turbo install is going to be only in one video. Originally I was going to do two parts, but since I made a separate video for the single bank fueling and MHD boost control conversion for the car with the DME repinning, I'm only going to make this one video. And thankfully this is finally going to be the first video of a single turbo top mount Z4 on YouTube finally. Luckily I'm able to do this because I was looking all over YouTube for somebody doing this install on a Z4 specifically, but in the forums I also did a bit of research, so it wasn't a complete shot in the dark. There are other people who have installed a Speedtech kit on a Z4, they just haven't made any videos or anything like that. So it does fit, but we are going to be doing a hood exit exhaust on this, so that's going to be a little different. Let's get started with installing the manifold studs and the feed lines for the turbo. So that is what we can do in the meantime. As you guys can see, this is where I'm at with my Z4 here. The twin turbos are gone, as you've seen in other videos if you've watched the other ones. I did not show me doing a disassembly of everything and removing the twin turbos just because I didn't really know what I was doing. And honestly, I don't know what I'm doing with the single turbo install, but it's pretty straightforward. I just didn't feel confident enough to make a video on the twin turbo removal, although it did end up being pretty easy. Just a quick rundown. I'm not going to go into much detail, but you can pull the twin turbos from the top on a Z4. You just have to do a lot of disassembly of the lines and everything else. But they will come out from the top slowly but surely. It's possible. So that's all I'm going to say on that. Once we get the single turbo installed, I'll go a little bit more into detail on how everything else intertwines with that. So all the steps that we have done beforehand to get this ready, such as the MAC Solenoid here, the oil catch can setup, and the single bank fueling through MHD. We'll show how that all ties into the single turbo later on, but like I said before, we're going to get started on a few things down below. Here we have all our parts minus the manifold, so a lot of coolant feed lines, oil feed lines, manifold studs and bolts, heat wrap which we won't be using, block off ports here. This Pulsar turbo is going to use coolant feed lines and oil feed lines. So there's the turbo right there, still in the bag. So that may be different depending on your setup and the turbo that you choose, which block off ports you will use. I also have this high temperature Loctite, blue Loctite here that we're going to use. I haven't seen other people use this, but personally I'm going to go ahead and use this just to be extra careful with this install. But yeah, that's everything minus the manifold. We're going to go ahead and start using these lines and the studs. Another nice thing that I forgot to mention is that they went ahead and labeled these bags with the feed lines to let you know where they go, which was a really nice attention to detail. And I really appreciate, especially for people like me who have never done this. So just shout out to them for doing that. I'm not going to lie to you guys, I went underneath the car and I had a bit of trial and error with these feed lines just because, like I told you guys, I have never done this before. But as you see on the writing here, it says to the top right coolant port for this coolant feed line, and then to coolant manifold for this feed line. But now, luckily, Speedtech does give you some instructions. They vary depending on what kind of turbo you use. So these instructions cover all kinds of installations. So both water-cooled turbos and just oil lubricated turbos. But here, I'll explain a little bit more. So here, the rear coolant plug you have here, and the front coolant plug you have here, and then the rear oil plug, so engine oil plug here. And then for your water pipe, depending on if you have the DCT transmission or the manual 6-speed transmission, your water pipe's going to look a little different, but it is going to have these two block off ports. Now this is the difference. If you have a water cooled turbo like me, you're going to be using the AN fitting instead of the plug up here. And it says right here, or AN fitting for water cooled turbos. So that's the one that we're going to use. That's right here that says top right coolant port. And the only reason that I got confused, even with the instructions here, is because when I put in this port here, it did not sit flush. I mean, it did fit correctly, but it didn't sit flush, which was kind of throwing me off. So that's why I went back to the instructions and got a little confused and then ended up taking it off. But I confirmed with the instructions that it does go there. So I'm going to go back in and put that in there. I'll show you guys what it looks like and why it threw me off a little bit once I get it back in. But I just wanted to explain that a little bit. So for us with our water-cooled turbo, we're going to be using this as an AN fitting. And when we get to the water pipe, we're going to use the right one for another AN fitting, which is going to be this other AN line. Now, I believe in prep work, so what I did is once I was ready to get this installed, I did sand it down a little bit with 600 grit, cleaned it with some brake cleaner before putting this in, and then also using silicone grease on this O-ring just to make it go in correctly so that you don't rip the O-ring. So make sure that you guys have some silicone grease. Clean this up a little bit. Same with all of these. So we're going to do that with all of these. And then I'm going to be using that high temperature blue Loctite on the bolts when I'm ready to bolt them down. And also going to be torquing them down to spec, which you can see here they include 9 foot-pounds on each of the bolts. So now that I have confirmed that, I'm going to go ahead and go back down there and reinstall this and show you guys how flush it looks and why I was thrown off. Alright guys, so as you can see, we have that AN feed port installed and torqued down. So that's right there. The line is not connected just because we don't need to do that right now. We are definitely going to do it before everything is installed. I just want to get the manifold in and the water pipe in just before I tighten down that AN fitting. So we're just going to leave it like that for now. Now we're going to move on to the other coolant port. Not the water pipe port, but this other port over here. So that one is not going to be an AN line fitting. That is just going to be completely blocked off. So we're going to do the same thing with this one, but I will show you guys which block off we're going to be using. We're going to be using this top right one here. And again, we're going to sand that mating surface just to clean it up a little bit. Lubricate the O-ring. And then put some high temperature blue Loctite on the bolt down here. And torque it down to 9 foot-pounds. So just one more reminder for you guys on what I'm doing. You don't have to do that. But I just like being extra careful, so that's what I'm going to do once again. But that's the last reminder that I'll do on that, and the other ones I'm just going to show you where I'm installing. So I'm going to cut this open, get it ready, and do that. Plug is now installed and torqued down, as you can see there. And then also the engine oil block-off port right there. The only thing on this one is you want to be really careful, but it looks like if it was mine, maybe just my plug port is a little off. So there's a little slight angle to it. So the bolt isn't completely flush with this plate, but it does seem to be doing the job here. I torqued that down as well. So these are done. Next step is the turbo oil feed line, which will go below the water pipe here, or where the water pipe used to be. If I can show you guys where that blue tape is down below. So right here, we're going to take this off and go ahead and install that. I'll show you guys what the line looks like right now. Here is the package that we're going to be using for that. And once again, I am going to undo the AN line, but leave it in the bag so it's still labeled. And just use the adapter here. So I'm going to put that in in the spot that I showed you guys, and the bolt for that one's a little different. Looks more like the OEM bolt. Thankfully they give us a new one because the old ones are very old. So let's go ahead and get this done. As you can see here, that fitting is now installed right there below the water pipe outlet, and that is torqued down to 18 foot-pounds. And just a quick side note for you guys, I did remove all of the OEM heat shielding, so including the heat shielding that's for the OEM lines. What I would recommend is, on top of this AN lines, buy some design engineering heat wrap that goes around the lines. So if you buy that and put that on each of these lines, you will be good, and it's just another extra safety measure along with that line too. Just while you're there and before you install, it's just a really good thing to do if you want this for a long term. I mean, pretty much everybody wants this and wants to think long term, so go ahead and do that. But that fitting is done, and you can see all of these lines are still in the original bag, so I don't mix them up. We are headed over to the last fitting here. As you can see here, this is the last fitting, which we're also gonna take off the AN line from and just install the fitting. It's kind of hard to see in the picture here, but I'll go ahead and show you on the car and show you guys where it goes in. But once again, I'm gonna get this prepped before I install this. The biggest fitting is now installed, so you can see it uses that yellow bolt there, and that's a 16 millimeter. Just so you guys know, I put it in from below, but in order to tighten it, I did it from above. I torqued it down from above down to 66 foot-pounds, so that is now ready. And then I just put some blue tape on the end of the fitting just so that nothing gets in there, because like I said before, we aren't putting the AN lines on quite yet. The only complaint so far on these fittings is they just sit kind of weird and it doesn't seem like they're fully flush. But I guess I can't talk shit on that until the car is running and they don't leak. Otherwise, they're working just fine as of right now. But what I really like from Speedtech is how easy this kit has been going on so far. And on a Z4 specifically, because there is so much room here to do all of that work, which is really nice. So I just think that the kit's so much better for the Z4 specifically, or anything is much easier to work on while working on a Z4 just with all this room. That does it for all of the fittings and the block offs for now. The next thing that we're gonna do is get all of these manifold studs on. I prepared the face of the manifold, so I cleaned that off as best as I could with 600 grit. And right now I have tape over where the gaskets go for the manifold. I really recommend you guys prepping that surface, but for me, I'm ready to put in those studs. And then there is one stud that they mentioned not to put on here. I'll show you guys on the detailed instructions. Here you can see on the instructions, they say that they don't want a stud here and that you have to shorten one over here. But I'm not sure if that is when using the OEM studs or if you're going to be okay with the studs that they provide over there. So we'll get to that and I'll show you guys. In other videos that I've seen, specifically Swap Depot, he does not mention anything about shortening any of these studs, or I should say this one stud by 6 millimeters or 5 millimeters. So we'll get some confirmation on that when we get to that point. As for the other ones, I'm gonna once again use the blue Loctite high temperature on all of these studs when installing them. So a quick update, I was able to get all of these studs in for the manifold, and as you can see, what I ended up doing, normally they send you 15 studs and you shorten one of them and you don't install the second one from the top right, and then you shorten the third one from the bottom right. But I only got 14 studs, so I sent them an email to see if they could send me another one, but they really recommended to just not even install that third one from the bottom right They said that you really don't need it. I trust their judgment, so I'm deciding to not install those two studs. We are all done here at the manifold side. I am still waiting for my manifold to be ceramic painted. I'm thinking that it'll be done this Friday. Once I get that, we'll be ready to install the manifold and then go from there. I think that I will be able to slide in the manifold from the top, so we'll be giving that a try. The manifold is finally here, guys. It's ceramic painted now. There's a little bit of overspray, but not too big of a deal here, as you can see. I do have two block offs for the oxygen sensors, because don't take my word for this quite yet, but I did hear that you want to block off both of these bungs and only use the downpipe on the turbo for the oxygen sensors for single bank fueling. We'll get into that later, but as you can see, that is all done. So the next step is to actually throw the manifold on, put the nuts on, and torque them down to spec, which we will see in the instructions here. But I also have to go ahead and put the gaskets on the manifold. The gaskets are right there. So I'll go ahead and throw on the gaskets for now, and then we'll go to the car and get the manifold thrown on. And the manifold was able to be put in from the top, so I snuck it through. Fairly simple, put it on the studs. And also, you want to make sure that when you're first putting the nuts onto the studs, that each one that you put on, you only thread it in just a little bit, just enough that the nut won't back out and fall out. And the reason that you do that is because there's some areas that you can't get the nut on unless you have enough wiggle room to kind of finesse the manifold so the nut goes onto the stud. So once you have all of them on just a bit, then you can go ahead and hand tighten them as far as you can, all of them, and then you're ready to torque down all of those manifold nuts. So I'm not going to do that quite yet. Right now the manifold is on just hand tight. I also put on these studs for the T4 flange here. In order to install these, I went to Home Depot and I got these nuts that are M10 by 1.5. So I put both of them on and then tightened them against each other, and then went ahead and torqued down these studs to 10 foot-pounds. So all of these are torqued down. In the instructions, it says to do that before you even put in the manifold, but I went ahead and did it last. So this is completely done. Now I'm going to go back to the manifold and torque that down. It says to torque the manifold down to 6 foot-pounds. So you want to do the star pattern and start in the middle and work your way out. One of the issues that you will run into when torquing down this manifold is you will definitely need an 11mm swivel socket that looks like this, just because there are some areas on the manifold that are very hard to get to and a normal socket won't go on. So you can get this from Harbor Freight. There's a set by Icon. It is $120 for the set, but you only need the 11mm, so you can go ahead and return the set once you're done. This is something that I won't normally use often, so I'm not going to keep it. Usually I'll buy a set and just keep it, but in this case, this is a one-time use kind of thing. I don't see myself using this again. So this is going to help torque down all those bolts. Same with maybe, you might not need it. You can probably get away with a normal extension, but I have these wobble extensions as well. So that's going to help just give me a little more wiggle room to torque all these down. Once again, I'm going to start with 6 foot-pounds and get them all torqued down to that. And then once I'm done torquing it down to 6 foot-pounds, we're going to almost double it a little bit and go to 13 foot-pounds. So start in the middle, start pattern, and do 13 foot-pounds. So the final torque, once you're done, all of these nuts should be torqued down to 13 foot-pounds. This is pretty cool, guys, getting this far on the Z4. You can see how that kind of mocks up. It is tilted a little bit. Once we're ready, I have plenty of time to work on this today, which is great. But I'm hoping that once I get everything torqued down, I'm going to mock up the turbo and just kind of set it on here and see how that looks. So I'm really looking forward to that. But I'm taking my time trying to get all of this done so I don't forget anything and not get ahead of myself. Just because, like I said earlier, I think this has been over the course of days. So just putting in a little time here and there. But after this, the real next step will be to kind of route all of the AN lines properly, get those AN lines on and tightened down. And once those AN lines are routed properly and installed, then we'll go ahead and move on to installing the water pipe. I'll follow up with you guys once I'm done with all this torquing and we'll move on. All of the nuts have been torqued down on the manifold. The manifold is now complete and all done on the bolt side of things. The next steps that the instructions call for are the setup of the wastegate. So the thing is, I'm going to do a hood exit like I talked about before. So I have a fabricator that's going to swing by soon and take measurements so that I can get the proper piping for my hood exit exhaust, the wastegate to be recirculated into the hood exit, and then all the other piping that I need. So it is going to be a little different. I will explain it my way for the hood exit later on. But as of right now, I'm skipping the wastegate. I went ahead and installed the lines that I showed you guys earlier in the video. So you guys know where those lines go because we already talked about it. And here I have an oil line here that goes down there, and then another oil line here, and then a coolant line here. So that's 3 lines total that I've installed so far, 3 AN lines. There's still another one back there, but that one is going to the water pipe. So before I install that 4th AN line, I'm going to go ahead and install the water pipe. But I want to get these tightened down. I don't want to tighten them down quite yet. They're just kind of hand tight because I want to orient them properly to the turbo. So it's finally time to kind of mock up the turbo here. Here we have the gasket that comes with the turbo. So I set that on there. And here's the turbo itself. So I kind of put tape over all the exposed areas. I did grab the extended oil drain adapter here. And what you have to do is, since this is a clamp-on system to the back side of the turbo here, you can loosen this clamp here in order to rotate the T4 housing here. And then in order to rotate the front of the housing here, so only rotate this part, you can loosen these bolts just a little bit. And that way only this part of the turbo rotates. So what it's really called is clocking the turbo. So you're going to want to do that. And here is how I clocked it for the Z4. You can see this extended oil drain here is clocked right between these 2 bolts here near the T4 flange. And that lines up perfectly with the AN line here. Now that I have it clocked the way that I'd like, I can go ahead and tighten all these bolts and this clamp. I'm not going to tighten them too much just because there may be a little bit more finessing with the fabricated piping that I'm going to have. So I'll go ahead and set the turbo on just to kind of mock it up, but you guys will see how it sits. There we go, guys. So something that I've been really waiting for a long time, just to see this car like this with a semi-big single turbo but twin scroll turbo from Pulsar. And as you can see how it sits, there's plenty of clearance. The hood does close. This is going to work perfectly. And because I have some other things back together, I wanted to see how much clearance I have for the hood exit here. So this is more than 5 inches here. There's plenty of room for that race muffler that I'm going to have here. Enough to kind of fabricate something that kind of turns in a way and then directs the hood exit slightly to the side, to the passenger side, so that the exhaust goes away from the windshield. And it'll sit like this here. And then we can see where the piping will go over here. The extended oil drain fitting does come with a gasket. You can see there. It's blue. And that comes with the packaging with the turbo. So I wanted to make sure that I mentioned that to you guys. So I have that gasket sitting in between that fitting and the turbo. And then I have it bolted down. Do not use any type of fluid gasket on that. Make sure to use one of these. Another thing that I want to note is for any of you that do not want to do a hood exit, the original OEM cold side piping will fit, as well as the downpipe. You see there's plenty of room there for a downpipe to go down to your exhaust, but it won't line up with your OEM exhaust, so you will have to do a custom exhaust from the downpipe back. I'm going to leave this here for now, but we'll start working on the water pipe. You guys can see here that I slipped in the coolant feed pipe here. I was able to get those bolts in, and it's hard to torque down from here, but I just grabbed the smallest ratchet and tightened it pretty tight just until it felt snug against the engine here. It feeds through here and connects to the water pump with that silicone hose over there. I'll show you guys from the top, but here from the bottom you can see it's in and it fits through the bottom, so you can definitely feed it through here and then get it where it's supposed to be. And you can see that I also connected the AN line that goes on the right side of the coolant feed pipe, so the fitting is also on, and then the AN line is connected to that fitting. So if you guys remember, we blocked off the left side here that I'm pointing to with the light, and we have another feed line for the coolant on the right. So that is also connected and routed through. I'll show you guys what the coolant feed pipe to the water pump looks like from the top. Here's what it looks like from the top. I used a Euro Parts silicone hose to connect to the water pump. It is a little kinked and it was really hard to get on. So what I did is I put the clamps on but loose and just left them hanging on the pipe, connected the hose to the water pump and to the coolant feed pipe, kind of oriented as best as I could so it wouldn't kink, and then tighten down the clamp. So you can see that they are accessible, so make sure you orientate those clamps so they're accessible in case you need to change anything. Another note is that this is the Z4 with the DCT transmission. So I had to do the conversion to a manual coolant feed pipe that doesn't have the separate pipe that comes off of the coolant feed pipe into the transmission. So along with that, I also got the silicone hose that's supposed to be for the manual transmission. So both the coolant feed pipe and that hose are meant for the manual transmission. So it shouldn't kink up. So if you guys are thinking that's maybe why it's kinking up, but I don't know. Quick update. So that kink in that hose was really bothering me and I couldn't let it go. So I ended up taking off the turbo again and unbolting the coolant feed pipe. And what I actually did was, as you guys can see there, it's all tight and bolted down on the coolant feed pipe side of the engine. It is no longer kinked. And just so you guys know, if you end up using a silicone replacement like this one, an upgraded hose preference, I guess, the pipe doesn't really have a pin for how far in you should have the hose on the coolant feed pipe side. So if you have it too far up the coolant feed pipe, then that's what ends up kinking the silicone hose. So what I would say is make sure you lube up the coolant feed pipe side with silicone grease. That way, once you mount it up to the engine, just loosely, you're able to adjust the silicone hose and kind of move it up and down and twist it and find that perfect spot that I have here so that it mounts up correctly. So it is a pain in the ass. I spent a lot of time doing this, but it's finally on correctly so you can see. Just wanted to give you guys a quick update on that. And all of the AN lines are on now. So I'm going to go through and tighten all the AN lines, try to route them as best as possible on the turbo. As you can see, I took the turbo off. I'm going to try to just line everything up as best as I can and then officially tighten everything down. But I won't be tightening down the top side of these lines just because we still have to work on our intercooler piping and hood exit exhaust. And here we have a mock-up of the turbo now. So as you can see, I just have it set on there on the T4 divided flange. So you can see there is plenty of clearance. As you can see, the hood will shut fully closed and not hit the turbo with this specific Pulsar turbo that you guys already saw the specifications on. So for me, we're going to do the hood exit through here, take some measurements, and then a fabricator is going to make that hood exit for me so that I don't have any clearance issues on that side as well. And then my piping as well. So the piping to the intercooler needs to be done. So another quick little mock-up, and now with the velocity stack. So you guys can see what that looks like. Moving on to the wastegate here. So we have a Pulsar 45mm wastegate. And I just wanted to show you guys what comes with the Pulsar wastegate. So you can see all of this here, along with springs and fittings. And I kind of stepped ahead here and installed the fittings as needed. I'll go more into depth, but a 14 PSI spring is already pre-installed. So if you're not going crazy, you should be good with a 14. I'm going to stick with a 14, so I didn't have to disassemble this and mess with the springs. I'm going to leave it as is. Here's the tool. So in case you want to change out springs, get like a clamp or something at the edge of your work table and kind of clamp it down evenly, and then loosen the cap and take out the spring, because you got to be careful with the pressure in here. It'll blow the spring out. So that's why you would want to use an end clamp or a table clamp or something to kind of put pressure down on this when you're loosening the cap here. But if you want to take a quick look at this, this is how it looks. And a little confusing fact here, if you're not familiar with wastegates like me, you might get confused with these coolant ports here. So there's a coolant port on both sides, and you would think that you would want to block these off, but with Speedtech's instructions, you can leave those open. The only ports that you want to block off here are the ports that you're not going to be using. So I'm going to use this side because the way that I'm going to orient this wastegate is going to be kind of like this. So it would be best for these two holes to be used for the fittings, so I can plumb my MAC solenoid lines. And this just worked out for me. So make sure you kind of do a test fitting and see what way you want to orient your wastegate so you can install them fittings properly. But if you want to see here are some caution remarks from Pulsar. And then on this side of things, so my instructions from Speedtech, you can see what they recommend. But as of now, this is ready. I can go ahead and throw this on the car. You got to make sure that along with this, you install the firing ring like this, and then clamp it onto your manifold. So that's what I'm going to do. Just kind of do a mock-up, install this, and then start plumbing my lines. Wastegate is on the car, on the manifold specifically, and this is how I have it orientated for now. And I have the clamp on. I had to grab the bigger clamp to get this on. So the smaller one that I showed you guys at first did not work, but I put some tape to tape off the open end and got that fitted. My only concern is that it is hitting the coolant hoses, the silicone ones, so we'll see how that goes down the line. There's nothing I can do as of now. Maybe I can wrap up the coolant hose with something to help it, but for now I'm going to leave it as is. Now I will show you guys my plumbing. So I started the plumbing for the vacuum lines for the MAC solenoid here. So you can see that I showed you guys that you're going to use one of these spots for the single turbo boost reference. And then finally we have our boost reference at the end. So that will go to the MAC solenoid. Thicker black line over there is going through the back. And then for the Z4, I routed it back here. And then behind the heat shield here. And then it comes all the way through here. And then I just have a bunch of slack. I showed you guys that I have a vacuum line running from the manifold instead of the turbo housing. So I did not tap the turbo housing or the cold side charge pipe. I'm getting my boost reference from the manifold. So that's coming around here. And then I have a T connector right here, just a brass one. It tees off here. One end goes to port 1 of the MAC solenoid. And then it tees off. And the bottom end routes down here to the bottom of the wastegate here. And then finally we have part 2 of the MAC solenoid, and that is routed here. And I kind of have it snuck through there all the way down here to, you can see the top side of the wastegate. So it's not permanent for now. I just kind of wanted to mock it up. I'll probably end up using some zip ties to try to secure it even more into these barb fittings. I know a lot of people use push lock fittings. I was kind of already running these barb fittings, so I just said screw it and continued on with these silicone vacuum lines that are 1/4 inch. But yeah, that's all done. I'm going to throw the turbo back on just to mock it up, but the plumbing is complete. We still are waiting on the custom fabricated piping, so that still needs to be done. For now, we're taking a pause at this point. Let's move on and get to the lines and routing the AN lines properly and connecting them. I'm still waiting on the guy, like I said, to get that piping fabricated. So kind of on the last stretch, but still a lot to do on the fabricator's end. Well, I'm sorry to disappoint, guys. I actually went ahead and had the turbo fully mounted and the lines routed and connected to the turbo along with the fittings to the turbo, just because we ended up going a different route. So in the beginning of the video and in past videos, I said that I was going to do a hood exit. It just ended up not working out for this car just because of the spacing and area where the hood exit would have been. What worked best was to go with a fender exit. So I guess this is the big reveal here. You can see that I have the turbo with the turbo blanket and the valve cover heat blanket from Speedtech, and then everything behind there. So this piping was fabricated just for this build. So here I have my single bank oxygen sensor. So this is the only oxygen sensor that I'll be running, which I have that routed through the back of the engine going over here to the connector. So this is the gray wire oxygen sensor for the primary. And then this section of the piping is one piece. And then I have another section going down there. So this is the race muffler that I showed you guys before. The reason that this piping looks like this is because I had it ceramic coated. So it is coated from the inside and out. And it goes down here, cut into the side of the car, into the fender. You can see that the exhaust exits right here. And then it's a teardrop along with this kind of trim on the exterior, just to give it a cleaner look. So that whole thing is ceramic coated. The muffler's pretty small. It's from Vibrant Performance. I already did a startup on the car, and it sounds pretty decent. It still needs to warm up. So a little more in-depth detail on the fender exit exhaust. It's 3-inch piping all the way out. So it's just a 3-inch. You can see how much space there is. I only wanted 3-inch, and I chose to have a muffler just to quiet down a little bit, but it is a race specific muffler. So it's not going to be that much more quiet. It's just a little bit toned down. Just to explain a little more, this heat shielding is temporary. This is just so I don't burn up the wiring with the exhaust. Even though it's ceramic coated, it's an extra layer of caution. What I am actually going to be doing is wrapping this end in some exhaust shielding that actually can be wrapped around the exhaust and then tightened down by some metal zip ties, which will act the same way as these are acting, but not make it look so messy. So that's coming up in the future here. Other than that, this Speedtech blanket does a really good job of covering up all the wiring, as well as some wrapping that I did on this plastic conduit. And then I added another layer of protection to the oxygen sensor wiring, and also put some heat shielding over here. But that was just another layer of caution. So you'll notice a lot of little steps of extra caution that I've taken, which was a choice of mine. But you guys can do what you think is best. I am running into some issues with the DME, which I'll explain in a little bit. But I also want to go ahead and kind of go over a few things that had to happen for the turbo to get mounted. And these are important details for anybody with a Z4 with the N54 engine. It just sucks that I couldn't show you guys how I got all this pieced together step by step. But first, let's start off with the fittings. So that was the first thing I did. I installed the fittings on the turbo to connect to the AN lines. And I made sure to use this high temperature thread sealant on those fittings so that these fittings don't leak. So there's 3 of them. One is, you can consider it the driver's side and the passenger side, and then the oil feed line, and then lastly, so actually 4 fittings. Lastly, the oil drain line. I'll have to get a light to better show you that. All right, so with the light, you can see that the fitting is towards the bottom. So you have to clock the turbo a certain way so that you can connect the AN oil drain line to that drain fitting connector. So that oil drain fitting down there, when I installed it on the turbo, it uses a gasket, which I put on. And then again, on all the bolts that I needed to tighten down, I used high temperature blue Loctite. Just to be extra careful, just trying to be as proactive as I can. But all of that was torqued down. So again, for any of you guys installing the Pulsar turbo, I have the AN coolant line that starts off from the top right port of the engine block going to the driver's side, and then the second coolant line, which goes from the coolant feed pipe. So remember guys, there's that coolant feed pipe, and then there's 2 fittings. One is blocked off, and the other one, we route it and go to the passenger side fitting. And then it's really hard to mix up the oil feed lines. So that comes from the bottom of the engine block. I've showed you guys in the beginning of the video when we were first installing these. That comes up here. As you'll learn from turbos, they always want you to have the oil feed line facing up, so kind of at that 12 o'clock position on the turbo, just to prevent oil starvation or something like that. I'm not an expert, but that's what I've looked into and found out. So that's all hooked up. Everything is tightened up. Another thing, if any of you Z4 E89 owners are looking in the Speedtech route, the cold side charge pipe has to be modified. It has to actually be made a little longer to reach the intercooler. So I use the OEM cold side charge pipe, but I had the guy who fabricated my fender exit exhaust use the cold side charge pipe, but lengthen it a bit more. I can get the dimensions from him if you guys want, but the OEM cold side charge pipe won't work. So just so you guys know. And then as you can see, you guys might be wondering about that little block off right there. Some people get the boost reference from there. Like I told you guys from the beginning of the video, I'm getting mine from the manifold, so that's why it's routed all the way back to the MAC Solenoid. So that's just blocked off. As for now, the single turbo is completed. I modified the beauty cover so that I could still use it. That's going to fit on here. I'm just still trying to figure out a few errors that I have with the DME, like I explained. I'll go further into details. I'll show you guys what the beauty cover looks like for any of you guys that are more on the OEM Plus side of things, because I still want a clean look underneath the hood. I ended up cutting the beauty cover in this shape so that way I can still run it. It actually looks pretty nice, so I'm glad I did that, and I'll get that on once I'm fully done with the vehicle. And if you guys have been watching all my videos, this car has been through a lot of work. So I'm glad that it actually fired up. But I would say it'd be impossible if I didn't run into any issues, which I did. As much work that was done, it's not that bad, honestly. So I'm constantly getting a crankshaft position sensor signal error, and then also an oil pressure signal error. So those are my only two codes at the moment, which was a little scary at first just because you don't want to starve the engine of oil in case there actually wasn't oil pressure. But I checked the oil cooler, which I'm running an oil cooler on this. As you can see, I have the Mishimoto thermostat here, which opens at a lower temperature, and that was filled with oil, so that was a good sign. So I'm very positive that oil is circulating throughout the engine. You can see my port injection here, that's running with my base map tune from Wedge Performance. And then here you guys can see my low pressure fuel pump sensor retro mod, which I will be making a video on. That's running to the DME. That's not working 100% quite yet, but on the way. Right now, the biggest issues are those DME codes, which I'm looking into. Once I get this car properly running and driving, I'll show you guys maybe some flames and just some revving of the engine and showing you guys how it's running with the single turbo and Nexus port injection. So here we go. The car is almost fully buttoned up together. There are some errors, but that will be fixed in the next video. I just wanted to put this first part of the video out there as soon as I could. A lot of people were questioning about the single turbo build, so I wanted to at least get one video out. The next video will show this car fully running and driving and what I did to resolve my issues. But just to be transparent, here are all the error codes that I have at the moment. So the boost pressure sensor errors are not an issue just because it's unplugged. When you first are tuning your vehicle as advised by Wedge Performance Tuning, they want to do crack pressure testing, I believe it's called, with the MAC Solenoid and the wastegate. So that's unplugged as of now. Just trying to get the proper tune on my car. It's just on a base map tune at the moment. And then the ambient temperature signal is because I have the temperature sensor unplugged. And then the crankshaft position sensor signal error that I told you guys about is off and on, so it doesn't always show up. It'll come off and on, and that's why the car has started, is because the car will start and run whenever that signal error decides to not show up. But the other major thing was just the oil pressure sensor signal, which I told you guys about, which you can see as a shadow code there. Now, if we go back into data logging and monitoring the gauges, these are the gauges that I have up as of right now, just for the parameters on the base tune once I get this data over to Wedge Performance. But this wasn't doing it before, but it looks like it's showing oil pressure read, and it seems to be moving, so that's a good sign. I didn't really do anything different, so that's a little strange. I guess the only thing that I did was adjust my low pressure fuel pump sensor wiring a little bit. I don't know how that would affect the oil pressure sensor monitoring on this car, but I guess that kind of helped it. So if someone knows, maybe they can better explain that. But with that, I'm also going to add the parameter, because right now at the moment, MHD is monitoring too many parameters at the moment. So I either have to choose between oil pressure and low pressure fuel pump sensor. And with you guys with the Z4, know that the Z4 does not come with the low pressure fuel pump sensor. So that's a whole rabbit hole in itself. And I'll try to explain that in that video. I'm not going to get too much into that. But these are really good signs as of right now. Well, guys, I'm sorry to disappoint that I couldn't exactly do a step-by-step. We did a lot of steps together, but just towards the end, things changed up, and I had to get that turbo on the car and get it finished. But I'm glad you guys got to see a majority of the work. And if you have any questions, I'll make sure to answer those down below, especially for any of you Z4 owners that need an extra hand or have any questions on going the single turbo and port injection route on the Z4. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in the follow-up video on the single turbo, and I'll catch you guys on the flip side.